Okay, good morning. Hamshach Chaim Beis, Volume 2. We're on page 1192. Okay. So the central theme that we're discussing here in Ayin Beis now is the issue of V'yadaita Ayin v'shavesel levavecha ki Hashem Elokim b'shamayim mimal v'aretz mitochas ein oid. That's the operative pasuk. And the focus now is on the section called b'shamayim mimal. After explaining how V'yadaita Ayin, how we know, we come to know and be aware and recognize and personalize. That's all included in the word das. And Vashavesel levavecha, and we turn it into emotions, feelings. How the divine, how we reveal and transform the tzimtzum of Elokim to see Havaya Elokim in Aretz Mitachas, in the earth below, on the earth below, which is seeing the divine within existence. We also come now to that awareness of Havaya Elokim on a higher level in B'Shamayim Mimal, not in the finite divine light within existence that radiates in the worlds, but in the infinite light that is beyond existence. So Havaya de Le'elo, and we transform the concealment, which also concealed that consciousness, that pre-tzimtzum consciousness from existence, and that's b'shamayim mimal. And how do we do this? We do both through avodah. All this is through the human effort that only a human being on earth can do. Because remember that tzimtzum concealed the divine in order for existence to come into being. So how does that change? Divine concealment was necessary to make existence come into being. But there's one free agent here, one radical free agent. It's called the human being. The human being is inserted into existence to disrupt and transform this tzimtzum. Left at its own, the earth and the universe would never come to experience anything but its own diminished consciousness of the divine through creation. God did create the world, every part of the world, from mineral, vegetable, animal, and every part of existence, but that's it. It's through a divine Asarim Amaris Nivra Elam, the 10 statements, the words of God enter into each part of existence. Yes, there's a bli gvul, but that's concealed. Even the Er HaGvul is also concealed within each creature. It's true that no creature wanders or no creature defies God's will and does not in any way, what's the word I want to use? Does not in any way transgress and change the divine plan, but neither do they add to it. So then, of course, the question is, what's the purpose of it all? That God just created a bunch of robots and puppets that follow God's rules, that the sun rises and the moon rises, and every creature and every system and organism in the cosmos fulfills its functions. What's the chiddush? That the God is running the world. The chiddush is that a human being should come, and only a human being can do this, to come into existence and disrupt it. What does that mean? To reveal the divine presence in a far deeper way, the way God is in his full glory, not just in a diminished way that God created a stage with props and every aspect is doing, and every part of every fiber of existence is fulfilling its role. That to come and transform the world and transform it to become a keli, a dira b'tachtenim to atzmus, that would not be accomplished on its own. So the human being, as we learned in the previous Maimer, Shem Ma, Adam is Gematria Ma Melagav, the Pnimius carries these powers, these inner powers, being a neshama that comes with such strengths. But such strengths also come with all the challenges. Remember, this world is a concealed world, which means a human being can also succumb and be seduced by the tzimtzum. And that's where free will comes into play, because we could also feed into the concealment and make it much worse. We see the world in which we live, how much horror and injustice human beings can perpetrate against each other. So the human being has both choices. And we have the capacity, on the other hand, to reveal the divine in existence, to take a piece of food, like he said, with birurim. I'm looking at the bottom of page where he specifies out in detail, and especially in the earlier Maimorim. This was all a long discussion. On the bottom of page 1179, where he said that a person goes into this world, and instead of giving in and indulging into the material, he reveals birurim, which means to separate and to clarify and to elevate the sparks. And in that process, he's now reversing the process and disrupting the tzimtzum, meaning transforming the tzimtzum being the nefesh habamis and the concealment within each one of us, by transforming it, revealing that divine. That's ba'aretz metachas, and then even deeper, revealing a bligvul, which altogether was not present. In the existence, you could say at least the Eira Gvul was concealed. It wasn't revealed, but it was concealed. Here, the Eira Bligvul wasn't even concealed. The Eira Bligvul receded into its source, and revealing also that by demonstrating that not just that divine exists in existence, but that the divine is primary, elikuz bepshitus, the pre-tzimtzum consciousness. That's what B'Shamayim Mimal refers to. Now, this, what I just said, even though it's written in the last pages, the truth is what I just summed up were a few hundred pages. Because when you go back in the whole discussion between difference in Shabbos and weekdays, and the idea of Rotze, remember I mentioned the 3 levels of Rotze. I just wanted to refer them to you where they are, because I went back just to find all the different places, the sources. So if you go back before the whole idea of Idaita Ayin, where we spoke about the 3 levels, Shabbos, like on page, I'm talking now 1129. We're now in 1192. So there he talks about the 3 levels of Tainug, and then which connects to the 3 levels of Rotze, which goes back all the way. I mentioned where Rotze began. With Atzmeya. Where was it? Just give me a minute. Yeah. He began on page 1015, Aleph Tezvov, about Rotze and Shuv. But the main place I want to focus on is, I think the Maimer Ba'alescha, yeah. The 3 levels of Rotze, and the bottom of page 1027. 1027. So that's one thing. So the whole purpose of Rotze is that we come into this world, and the goal is that we don't remain complacent, but we yearn and we seek to transform, to elevate. So that's what the next section here, I'm just summing up on page 1192, he says, and how you mamshel der and self hablugvul, not just through ner mitzvah and Torah but through derech chaim techachas musar, which is through affliction, through challenge, through difficulties, which is higher than the Shem Havaya of Torah mitzvahs. So to explain this, he began going back to the second, to Eliyahu Novi's story of where the Jews say twice Havaya Elikim, and that came as a result of a challenge. What happened? They had defiled and destroyed what he calls Hirus, Mezbeach Hashem HaHarus, the altar of God. And Eliyahu came by Yirapeh. He came to heal it. And when the Jews saw what Eliyahu did, the miracles he did, that elicited from them to say, Havayu Elikim, Havayu Elikim. So what do you see from this? That the second Havayu Elikim came This doubled Havaya Elikim came as a result of a problem, of a challenge. So in other words, when everything is going regularly, which we'll learn a little later, Matan Torah, there you only have Anochi Hashem Elokecha. But Havaya Elikim, also twice Havaya Elikim, which includes B'Shamayim Amal Aretz Mitachas, Er HaBligvul, that comes only through a process of like tshuva, where there's a darkness that you can, and then you reveal the light within the darker state. That's why, so that's what he's begun. So what does the Mizbeach refer to? He says Mizbeach is Malchus. The fire on the Mizbeach is the 5 gvuras, the 5 severities of Malchus, which is the passion, the Ratzeh v'Tshukah, the yearning, and the hungering, and the pining of Malchus to connect to higher levels. El Ishach Chukosach, the Isha, Eish Hashem is connecting to Eish Yud. And that's a fire on the Mizbeach. And that, as we'll soon learn, in turn will cause to draw down the Er HaBligvul, the infinite light, which is the Havaya Elikim, the second Havaya Elikim. Or I should say the 2 Havaya Elikims. Okay. Now, to explain this, he's going to now refer back to topics that we learned literally hundreds of pages ago. So I'm going to refer to it back and forth, back and forth. I do want to say one thing, since the question was asked in the last class, because on top of the page, we learned that Makif affects all of existence equally. So I want to refer you to where this is discussed in volume 1. I mentioned it, but I'll tell you exact place. If you go to, I think chapter, let me see. Yeah. Chapter 58 and on, the Rebbe Rashab talks about the effect of Makif on existence and the specific element that it's an equalizer, and it talks about specific impact. He discusses there. Yeah. And especially chapter 60, 61. Basically the Maimer V'Hoya Kisove, 60 through 63. So those that want to look that up. Okay. So just to put it in context, more context of how we learned the Maimarim here, keep in mind the following. I'm going to the broader picture of Ayin Beis now, the interface. Aramim Chelekai HaMelech has 2 meanings, either Mata L'Mayla or Mamayla L'Mata. From the bottom up, which means the work of elevating Malchus, which is literally what we're learning here. The Rotzeh of Malchus, going upward, reaching upward, to the point of reaching Aramimcha. Aramimcha L'Kai HaMelech, reaching Keser to Er HaBligvul. And there's the second interpretation, Rememus, coming down into Malchus, into L'Kai HaMelech, to the divine. L'Kai HaMelech basically, in this context, is the Yesh of the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, and Remimcha is the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. So the question is, which way are you going, from the bottom up or from the top down? So we did both approaches. I want to also point out, because this has been a topic that has come up again and again, about Avedim Umata L'Mayla. I just looked on Shabbos at a chapter which I think is worthwhile reading. If you're not going to read it on your own, I would even read it with you. But I hope you read it on your own. And that is, let me tell you which chapter it is. One minute. Yeah. chapter Shin Ayin Ches, 378. It's on page 778. Shin Ayin 776. I'm sorry. On page 776, I think is a very critical chapter to read because it makes the point very clearly why we need Mamata Lamaila. I always was referring to chapters a little later, Torah and Tefillah, which is chapter 381, but I'm now talking about 378. I think it's worthwhile reading if you really want to appreciate what we're learning now about elevating from the bottom up, why that's vital and necessary. Okay. So to go back to the context here, so the Rebbe Rashab, to explain that, Torah and Tefillah is from top down, Tefillah is from the bottom up. He brought the Magid, the Torah of the Magid, where you shall make trumpets, chatzitzuras, two halves of one whole, which is essentially the interface of us, the neshama, being one half, the divine, the Gilui of Elikus, the second half, and to come together. And to explain that, he went and spoke about, the Magid continues that God created many tzimtzumim through many worlds to conceal the divine providence, which we could not tolerate its brightness, in order for a human being to reverse the process by separating himself from the material world, rotzai, and reaching upward and transforming this concealment. So first he discussed at length how the divine infinite can connect to Atzilus. But then came the question, how does it connect to below Atzilus? Biyah, which follows a partition. And in the bigger sense, how does it connect to the world after the Tzimtzum? Because pre-Tzimtzum had to be concealed in order for existence to emerge. So it seems irreconcilable that you cannot bring these two worlds together. Pre-Tzimtzum, the existence is predicated on a Tzimtzum happening, so pre-Tzimtzum consciousness has to be concealed. So can we ever connect with it? Can we ever, post-Tzimtzum reality, experience a pre-Tzimtzum consciousness? That's been the big question that he's been asking from the time, we're talking about hundreds of pages back, especially the Pesach Maimarim. And the answer briefly was that the key is to transform the Tzimtzum, because the Tzimtzum is not an end in itself. If it was an end in itself just to create existence, yeah, that's it. It's a cutoff point. It's like a glass ceiling. We can never go back beyond the Tzimtzum. But since the whole Tzimtzum was made in order for the Oyer before the Tzimtzum to penetrate existence, but it can't do so initially because existence needs to first take hold and expand its containers through its Aveda, then that changes the whole equation. Because the Tzimtzum is in order to bring revelation, and the revelation before the Tzimtzum has embedded in it the Tzimtzum and the whole purpose. So then became a long discussion on transforming that Tzimtzum, how that takes place. The two aspects of the Tzimtzum affecting the Bligvul, the Tzimtzum affecting the Gvul, Gvul, as we've been discussing here briefly as well. Well, he just sums up what he said there. So bottom line is, the work is to transform it on all possible levels. You must begin with the Oyer HaGvul, because that's what we can relate to. That first we reveal the divine that's commensurate to us, that's proportionate to us. But then we can climb all the way to the Oyer HaBligvul. And then after that, he said, and how do you reach that Oyer HaBligvul? Like I said, Derech Chaim Techachas Musar. Okay. Then the Rebbe Rashab continued and began and said, to understand all of this better, let us go to the Pasuk V'yadaita Ayin v'shavesa levavecha. And this is now the Shavuos Maimarim. So the Pesach Maimarim of Ayin Hey covered the Tzimtzum and the transformation of it. The Shavuos Maimarim begin the next topic after a deep analysis of all the parsayos and all the partitions, if you may recall. So now he goes back, let's understand it in the context of V'yadaita Ayin. And that's where the verse, he asked the questions, what does each component add? And then he went to explain it, and he began with the word Hayom. Yom is day and night, Tzimtzum and Gili. That means they both work together with each other. That's what creates a day. You need darkness and light because both of them are part of revelation, part of Yom. What are these two things in Aveda? Rotzei and Shuv. There you have it. The Rotzei and the Shuv. That's what he says on page where he says Rotzei v'Shuv Yom v'Layla in Aveda. Is Rotzei v'Shuv. Explains it both ways, how the Rotzei is in the Oyer, the Yom, and the Shuv is in the Keli, and it's also the other way around, that the Rotzei is in the Keli and the Shuv is in the Oyer. That he discussed at length. So then we have now Rotzei v'Shuv, which is the Tzmeya, L'mas Face Hirva as Tzmeya, that we discussed. Hate Sama, right? We learned that here on this page. That's all referring to the Rotzei, but it has to come together to make it into a full day. That's Veidaita Hayom. That led us into the discussion of Shabbos and the weekdays. That the weekdays is Rotzei, Birurim, elevating the world, and Shabbos is Amshachas Einig, Shuv. And that began the whole discussion of Shabbos and the weekdays, and Man, and Lechem in HaShamayim, and Lechem in HaOretz, the different levels of Man. Birur Eichel Metech Pselis, Pselis Metech Eichel is the work of the weekdays. Then comes Eichel Metech Eichel in holiness itself, and then comes something that's higher than Birurim. It's just Tamshacha Atzmis, 3 levels. That was a long discussion about Man. And that led us into that Lechem in HaOretz is Das Tachten, Lechem in HaShamayim is Das Elyon, the 2 levels of Das, which are both in the Pasuk V'yadaita Hayom. That led us into a whole discussion of those 2 types of Das, of perception, which are the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra and the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. That was that long discussion. And then he brought it all back to V'yadaita Hayom, that this is what V'yadaita is, that we should know, Hayom. We should know the connection of Havaya and Elokim, which is Ayim, Yom and Laila, that they're really one. That the concealment is really not a concealment, it's really there only to bring revelation, Gili of Havaya, in 2 ways, the Havaya del Tata, Havaya del Eila, the Shiluv of Adnai and Havaya and Adnai, the Shiluv of Havaya of Adnai and Havaya, the 2 levels, which really break into 3 levels as we explained and discussed. And that brought us to the question then, why do we need both? So the first explanation was to negate duality, that the divine is also here within existence, not just in heaven. And within mitzvahs maisis, actions that the human being does. And the second explanation, that is going now more, deeper, is that it's referring to the Eira Gvul and the Eira Bligvul. That Oretz Metachas is revealing of Ayolikim that resides within existence, the Eira Gvul, and Hashemayim Amal is the Eira Bligvul. And that now brings us back to where we are here. How do you mamshich the Eira Bligvul? Through transforming the concealment. That is the Techachas Musar, which is the healing of the broken altar. We can call it that, the healing of the broken altar, or the healing of the desecrated altar. Okay, and how do you do that? That's through Rotzei. And Eliyahu was able to evoke the Avayu Elikim, double Avayu Elikim, in the transformation that came through this dark moment that took place when they desecrated and they destroyed the Mizbeach. That brings it all together. But now you're going to see he's going to start referring to the Tzimtzum and Yom V'Layla again, dark and light. That's why I wanted to just tie it all together. Now, I hope this summary was clear, because it's vital to be able to read further right now. But it was also a summary it's a good thing, regardless, to have summaries from time to time to just put it into context. And I should add that the Eira Gvul and Eira Bligvul was the major theme of volume 1. Pnimi, Makif, Keser, and the Spheres. And that Eira Bligvul was revealed by Matan Torah, Chodosh. And Eira Gvul is what the Ovis did by refreshing and realigning existence to the way it was intended to be. But Matan Torah brings the Chadash, Ablikvul, the Yichud Avai, the Yichud Primi of Yichud of Abba ve'Ima Yalon, as we learned back in volume 1. So that ties it all together. And obviously there are many more details, but that's brings it back to the beginning of Ayin Beis, Keser. We're trying to bring Keser, which is Bligvul, Keser Rotzen Hashem, which is higher than existence, and connected to our existence. And all through that, we ultimately connect to the Etzem Atzmus in all forms and fashions, as we learned that Eira Gvul and Eira Bligvul both together reveal different aspects of godliness. And together they come give us a picture somewhat and give us an ability to connect to Atzmus, which is beyond, obviously, all these levels in the first place. Okay. Now, unless somebody has a question on what I just said, I'm going to now read on page 1192 from a Bir Inyan. Okay. So the line begins, Bechinas Heit Sama, Atzmeya, Heit Sama, Meshtekekes LeBechinas Yud. So he's talking here about the Mizbeach is the Eish, Mizbeach is Malchus, the fire is the passion, the Rotze and Shukah, like a fire that's yearning and reaching, licking the air, looking upward. Okay, the lower light reaching Karik, always calling to the higher one. The female yearning for the male, in this case, Eish Hashem, Eish Shavaya, Malchus, looking for the Eish Yud. Atzmeya, Chins Heit Samam. Okay. Ubir Inyan Eish Hey ve'Eish Yud. And what's the meaning of Eish Hey and Eish Yud? Remember, Eish Hey is Isha, Eish Yud is Ish. The Gemara, the famous Gemara, Ezer Kenegdeg, that when the two flames have Yud K, they join. So here he's talking, so the Eish Hashem, Eish Hey, Eish of the Hey and the Eish of the Yud. What is that? Ubchinas Eish Shcheda ve'Eish Levena. So in flame itself, in passion itself, there are two types of flames. A dark flame and a light flame, and a white flame. Sometimes this is explained as being the darker part of the flame that's closer to the wick, and the brighter part of the flame, like the yellowish and brighter part, which is farther from the wick. Back on page, if you go to page 840, Tough Mem, go to page 840, he says like this. I'll just read from there because it'll help us understand what we're talking about here. You see the paragraph begins, chapter 408. In Yidush B'chinas Eish Hashem ve'Eish Yud. V'hein B'chinas Eish Shcheda ve'Eish Levena. Dark flame, white flame. Nehura Uchma v'Nehura Chivra. The dark part of the flame and the white part of the flame. The Nehura Uchma, the dark part of the flame, wa Eish HaNechaz Ba'apsila. It's the flame that is grasping and is close to the wick. Sheserif umachle es apsila. It burns and consumes the wick. And the white flame is the neder chivra is the white flame that's beyond, that's higher than the wick. She says, "Behind the beginning, nehera uchma, nehura uchma." The lower flame, the dark flame, are the flames of fire of the soul that are burning and consuming the flames and passion of the animal soul. That's why it's dark. It's darkened because it's involved. It's like the Mizbeach HaChitzon. We talked about the Mizbeach. It's burning when you bring an offering of an animal. It's not a simple process. You have to break down the animal. So the flames are consuming the animal. That's dark, called dark flame. And the white flame is the neshama on its own. It's almost like the difference between the weekdays and Shabbos, or between the mizbeach hachitz and mizbeach hapnimi. Mizbeach hapnimi is incense. Does not have to consume anything. It doesn't have to transform anything. It doesn't have to, in this case, consume the animal. So there's the neshama as it's so-called struggling with the animal soul and offering it. That's the darker flame. And the Hura Chivra is the flame part that is the soul itself shining. Okay. That's why I just wanted to bring that for a moment into the picture. A second. Okay. So he says, now he's going to explain this now in the context of Tzimtzum and Gili. The Hineksiv, now this you may recall from back on page, you go back to the Yedaita Ayin, the Shvuas Maimer. I'm referring to it simply because the context is much better understood. So if you look, page 997. And further, 997 and on, is what he's going to now be summing up. So whatever we're going to learn is going to be referring back to 997 and on. So he says like this: it says there was evening and there was morning, and in that order. In the beginning, there was darkness, and then there was light. That's the order in the pasuk. Erev Beiker. It doesn't say Beiker. There was morning and evening. There was evening and morning. So back on page 2, Aleph Beis 1002 is which? Darkness precedes light, or light precedes darkness? So he's now going to address that. Why does Erev come first? Because in order for there to be an energy that is commensurate with the world, remember, we need an existence. If you overwhelm existence with a very powerful light, it's like a power surge that will blow out all the circuits. So in order for there to be a that's commensurate with Elam, that the Elam, the world, is capable of receiving. So in the beginning, first there had to be a tzimtzum arishin. That first primordial tzimtzum, concealment, shahaya b'eirein sof, which was an eirein sof in the infinite divine light. So there can be light before darkness from the point of view of existence now. So first you need a tzimtzum that conceals the light, the Erein Sof, on all levels, both elements of the tzimtzum, but especially the first one, because as long as the light is shining in an unlimited way, the existence could not emerge and it could not receive the light. So the first thing you need is tzimtzum. And that's Bereisha Chashecha. That first, the Bereisha, first there was darkness. V'hada Nehura. V'hada means and afterwards. And then followed by B'chinas Er V'ziv. Nehura is light. Er V'ziv, a light and a reflection. Hameir Es HaCheshach, which radiates and illuminates the darkness. Commotion is Bar Le'el Ba'erach, as was discussed earlier at length. Where's earlier? I just pointed to you where earlier is. Especially page 1002 and on. But this is discussed many times earlier. Okay. Now, in addition to summing up what we learned earlier, one of the main things why I keep focusing on the whole flow because the Rebbe Rashab is very clearly not going to be elaborating length. You see how short everything is here. Like even the words Eish Chayda ve'Eish Levein, he didn't explain. And now by the Erev and Baker, he's saying briefly, but he's relying on hundreds, literally tens and pages. Discussed this earlier, just earlier. So that's why I'm bringing that in, because it's vital. Even those of us that learned this before, we may not have fully remember it. Especially we have people in the class here that have not learned it. So keep in mind, don't be deceived by the brevity here, is because it's really bringing together things that were discussed at length. And when the Rebbe Rashab writes, Commission is Bar Leil Ba'erech, he's not just giving us a placeholder, he's actually telling us that I discussed this at length, which means go look there and see what I said. So that's why I'm bringing it all here together as much as I feel that's needed. But it could be we need to discuss it even more. But I'll try to plot through this, keeping all that information in the background as I'll refer to it. So now he goes to the next subject. It's not the next subject, but introduces another term that he also discussed earlier. And this is V'zehu Eiter Kesalma. He wraps himself with light like a shirt. In other words, Oyer is like a divine shirt. So you would say the divine exists, and he uses Oyer to wrap himself. Oyer is wrap like a shirt, Salma. We already discussed, sometimes it says Salma, sometimes Simla. That's not relevant right now to our discussion here. Mastir.
Rabbi,
Salma is a garment that conceals and that.
Can you repeat the last sentence? Your image and voice suspended on my end.
Everybody hears me well?
Yeah, we hear you. There was just a break in the
Okay.
transmission.
I don't hear you well. You keep going, stopping, and going. I don't know if anybody else has that concept.
Yeah, it happened a few times.
Yeah.
Should I check it out, or should we just continue?
Who knows?
I didn't lose any that much of what you said. I mean, not that I can comprehend it too well, but I didn't lose it audibly.
It just maybe repeat the last sentence.
Okay. V'zeu eiter kesalma. He wraps himself with light like a shirt. Salma b'chinas levush hamaylim u'mastis. Salma is a garment that conceals and covers. Okay, so what do we hear from this? That not just the tzimtzum conceals, that the Oyer is also a concealer, which you don't usually hear about. You usually hear the Oyer is a revealer. But the Oyer is also part of the concealment, because compared to the etzem, it's even Oyer is already a garment. And he explains in the parentheses. Again, this is something that was discussed at length earlier, and I'll refer to it as need be. So what is this level of levush, of Oyer? So the levush can be explained in different levels. It depends where you're talking. That God wraps himself with light like a shirt can be lower levels. It could be in Biyah and Atzilus and higher than Atzilus. He's usually now, before the tzimtzum, what is it referring to? It's referring to the divine thought that I will rule. Remember, machshava v'ana emlech is when God already before the tzimtzum is envisioning and determining that he wants to rule, which means the Oyer that's already relating to something outside of the divine. But it's still pre-tzimtzum because existence doesn't exist yet. So we call it the Shiur Atzmei B'Koyach, he's going to say. So this is B'chinas, Shugam Kim B'chinas Levush HaMaylim. That's also a concealing garment. Why is that a concealing garment? Because compared to levels where God is not yet thinking about existence, the divine that's beyond existence, that's already a garment. God added a garment, so to speak. Now, obviously, we're not talking about a physical garment. We're talking about another layer. Like we talked about the difference between Eira Bligvul and Eira Hagvul. The Eira Bligvul is undiluted, is unadulterated altogether. It's purely reflection of the divine without any breaks, without any boundaries. Eira Hagvul is also Eira Atzmi. God wants Eira Hagvul. No one's diminishing that. But it's how God now is adding another message. He's sending another message to the Eir. I want you to be defined. I want you to be able to go and be, even though you're fundamentally my will, extension of my will, but I want you now to enter existence and after the tzimtzum, the kav, and create structure. Eira Bligvul is an undefined state. So therefore, when you say Ratzon Ano Emlech, Machshava V'Ano Emlech, you're already saying it's already a garment compared to the level before he says, I want to rule. And the same thing, this is the Eir that is like a garment, the Eir Hagvul. And the same thing, that Tzimtzum is also a level of garment, because the Tzimtzum for sure is a concealer. The Machshava V'Ano Emlech is only a conceal because it's not the full divine infinite possibilities. Think of what we spoke about, the artist in all his infinite possibilities. Now it's a Machshava V'Ano Emlech. He wants the thought to rule. So that's why it's considered to be a Levush Hamaylim. Even though, frankly, it's not a real concealment, but like we spoke about the Rishimu, compared to Bligvul, even the God's will in a finite thing is already finite, is limited, is a defined state compared to the undefined of the Bligvul. Okay. The Tzimtzum, V'yesh Leimer, and we can say, Masha Tzimtzum Nikra Salma. What's the difference then between the Tzimtzum's garment and the Machshava Emlech garment before the Tzimtzum? He says like this. Yesh Leimer. The Tzimtzum, what the Tzimtzum is called a garment, Hu kamay halavush shemachas al gufa adam. That's like another entity, a garment that's covering up on the human body, on the body of a human being. V'loy kamay lavush amachshava shu helam sheyesh begili gamken. Not like when we say machshava is also a garment, but it's a very different type of garment. It's a garment that conceals, but the concealment also has revelation in it. So let me explain the difference. By the way, the sound is coming well now? Is all good? Smooth?
It's bad, much better.
Okay. Much or perfect?
Just much.
Okay. So this is something we discussed at well as length earlier. I'm not sure why he's not referring to it earlier. He just says it as a yesh lemer. But let me explain. A number of times when we elaborated on this whole topic, I explained the following. That you have to remember all levels that are not physical, being that they're spiritual, they're all for us pretty conceptual. We can't touch them, and we can't in any way physically relate to them. So we have to use our minds, and with examples from this world, from my flesh I behold God. That's what Chassidus Chabad does. It gives us examples in our world to be able to understand spiritual states. Let's just take, for example, Eris and Kalim. I made a point many times. Energies and containers. Without thinking much, what do we all think about when we hear that? We think about a cup and water in the cup. Or a kos, a becher that we use on Shabbos or Yom Tov, and the wine we pour into it. Eir and Keli. If you want, you think about it in other ways, a barrel. And I mean, basically, we think of it as a receptacle and that what's inside the receptacle. A keli, a container, a pot, and we put food in the pot and we cook it there. Now, obviously, Lamaila in Ruchnius, it's not quite like that. So it's only a mushal. When you say Eir and Keli, it's a mushal. It's an example. As I pointed out, and a Keli in Ruchnius is also an Eir. Is it not energy? Well, the keli is what? It doesn't have tangibility, So why do we call it keli? Why do we say eris and kelim of Atzilus? The answer is because it's expected for us to use our minds and negate the concept of a physical container, like a cup, and I'm pouring water in it, and understand container in the conceptual sense. What's a conceptual container? It receives a makabel. That's one thing. It's not whether it has whether it's made out of metal or plastic or glass. It's a receptacle. It receives. Oyer is mashpia. Oyer transmits. So when we say eris and kelim l'mayla, we mean number one, the transmission of something and it being received. Number two, a keli is a concealer and oyer is a revealer. Oyer is revealing what the source wants to reveal. So the classic example which helps us move from a tangible, physical, crass perception to a more sublime and refined one is teacher and student. You say the teacher is the oyer haseichel from the teacher, being transmitted to the clay haseichel, the clay hamakabel of the student. You're using the word oyer and keli. Now, of course, the keli by the student is his mind, but it's above all, it's his receptivity. If the student was not in a receptive mode, then there wouldn't be a keli. If the teacher was not in a transmitting mode, there wouldn't be a oyer. So it's about oyer and keli. One is transmitting and the other is receiving. And the revelation of the idea, of course, is the oyer. And the keli is not concealing the oyer, concealing in the sense that it's containing it. It's limiting it. So when the oyer is going into the keli limits that it shouldn't, just like a physical container. It doesn't let the liquid spill all over the place. It contains it. So you can now drink it. If the oyer of the teacher, let's say he did a perfect job of teaching well, and it's commensurate and tailored to the student, but the student didn't have a keli, what would happen? The oyer would be like scattered energy. There'd be no place for it to rest. It needs a receptacle. It needs the student's focus and concentration and mind to receive it. So in that context, when we think of it this way, now I extend this topic, subject further. So what is a concealer? What's a revealer? Because now I ask you this question. The oyer of the seichel of the teacher, I just said it's revealing and it's about transmitting. But think about it in context of the oyer seichel to the teacher himself. Is the oyer reflect everything that the teacher is? Absolutely not. Just like the art doesn't reflect everything the artist is. Just like the oyer aleki doesn't reflect everything God is. It's not the primary thing of God, is to transmit light. Yes, light reveals and light is transmitting. But if you think about it, oyer, legaba moer, if you compare the light to its source, you could say it's also a form of a keli in a way, or a salma, a form of a concealer. In the fact, not that the oyer is concealing, but that the oyer is only an aspect of the divine as he manifests in oyer. And what about all of the divine that doesn't manifest in Gilui, in Revelation? The Yesh, for example, like we learned, the Atzmus is not all about Ein Sof. Atzmus is Muslo, Shlilas HaKol, that he negates everything. That oyer does not reveal. I mean, ultimately, oyer reveals that too, but oyer does not have that property in it. So even sunlight compared to the sun, where the sun was created to give off light, even there, the light is not revealing everything the sun is. How much more so with God, who's not even a sun? God forbid, you can't call God the source of light. He is the source of light, but he's not defined by being the source of light. So thus, what do you see from this? That the word lavush or concealer can be very relative. If you're talking about lower levels, the concealment is very direct, and others, the concealment is not really a concealment; it's a revelation. But relative to higher levels, it's a form of concealment. With that said, let me now go back to what he explained here. Let's take a physical example. We call, what's a lavush? When you say you're wearing a lavush. So for most of us, a lavush is a jacket, is a garment. Pants are a garment. A shirt is a garment. A yarmulke is a garment. We have the levushim, big day kahuna. These are garments that are not, we are not born with them. They're not one with us. The garment is something you put on for different reasons. You can put it on to protect yourself from the cold, from the elements. You can put it on mitzat tznius to cover up your body. You can put it on the kavod l'siferes to beautify yourself, to reflect malchus. A king wears kingly garments, kingly robe. The Kohanim wear priestly garments. Different garments for different times, Yom Kippur, the rest of the year. So those are garments that we call levush hanifrad. The garment is not an extension of you. It's hanging in a closet or wherever it may be, and you put it on different occasions. And you could take it off and put on another one easily. How about the skeleton of the human body? On one hand, it's a garment, because it's not the nefesh, it's only the skeleton. But on the other hand, it's irremovable and irreplaceable. So that's called a levush hamachuber, a garment that's attached to the person. So if you said like this, is the goof of a human being a levush? Or is it part of the entity? So you say, compared to a jacket or a coat, it's not a levush, it's part of you. But compared to the neshama, it's a levush because the soul is not defined by the body. So the fact that you call something a shirt or a garment doesn't necessarily mean it's always the same level garment. So this is what he says here. There's two types of garments. There's the garment of the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum is another force of God. Koyach hagvul. Here we have the bli gvul is infinite light going everywhere, encompassing everything. Divine consciousness, no room for anything else. God then imposes another power that he has. It's called koyach hagvul. It's not the bli gvul itself. It's the koyach hagvul of Ein Sof. That what is it doing? It's like a garment outside of the bli gvul that tells that dresses up the bli gvul and also the gvul for that matter, everything before the tzimtzum, and doesn't let it shine in a revealed way in the chalal l'makom panim, the space that it creates. So he calls that would be, he says, is like a garment on the body of a human being. It's not part of the body. It's part of divine power, but it's not part of the divine revelation because it's a concealer. Then there's another levush. The oir itself is also levush. And that he compares to the levush of machshava. Remember, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, there are three garments: thought, speech, and action. Let's talk about thought. Is thought a garment? Thought is a way we think, is the way our minds work. Why do you call it a garment? Because thoughts change. What you think about can change all the time. So compared to dibur or maisa, or further, compared to a garment like a jacket or a coat or a shirt, machshava is connected with mind, with the seichel, or with the midas of the person. But compared to the midas and the seichel and the nefesh, the machshava is a levush. But what's the difference between that garment and the garment of the tzimtzum, which is like a garment that you put on? It's not just helam, it's also gilui. That's what he says. Machshava shehu helam sheyesh bei gilui gamkein. It's a helam because it's only one thought, not all your ideas. But you can't call it a concealer in the sense that it's not revealing anything. Of course, the whole idea of thought is I'm thinking now about 2 + 2 = 4. So compared to the infinite or to the multitude of ideas in my mind, it's only a garment. Compared to the actual brain and the emotions a person has, machshava is a garment. It's an expression. But at the same time, you can't call it a concealer completely because machshava is revealing at least one thought. So it's a concealer that reveals. Whereas the tzimtzum is a concealer like a garment. Now the tzimtzum is also b'shvil hagilui. Remember, the purpose of the concealment of the tzimtzum is also to reveal. But that's a second step. That first step is it has to conceal like a garment conceals, like the garment that covers the human body. So in this parenthesis, he basically qualified the difference between salma, salma, when you say you refer it to oir, It is also a garment because it's not expressing everything of the divine. It's a garment, the levush hamaylim, but it's also a revealer. And tzimtzum is a garment that's primarily a concealer because it's something like an additional force, like I just explained, like the garment on the body. Okay.
Can I just want to clarify something. You probably spoke about it a lot. The tzimtzum, is that just the siluk, or is it the siluk and the kav?
Tzimtzum means concealment. The kav means gilui. It's two different stages. First, God concealed. First came the tzimtzum. 1 second. First came the concealment, where he conceals all the energy, and then the lashon in Eitz Chaim is va'achar kach himshich v'chozer v'hoyer es hakav, and then came a kav that flowed out from the oyer before the tzimtzum into the cholul makom, the space. That's the language in the Eitz Chaim. Tzimtzum first Eid Ein Sof, tzimtzum, reshimu, if you wish, and then kav.
Okay, because here, so why does it say here is the tchilas hatzimtzum is right before the brackets?
What are you referring to? I don't know what you're talking about. Bereisha chashecha v'hada nehura. First comes at tzimtzum, and then came a kav. Then came Meir.
Okay, no, sorry. I thought it said tchilas hatzimtzum. Okay, maybe I just read that wrong.
Umizen ishtalshel. It's going now back to after the parentheses. So Sam begins to Levush HaMamza. Umizen ishtalshel beginnes erev shu beginnes cheshach shalamata. Hainu beginnes mitzias hadover. And from this garment, one second. Evolves the level of erev, of evening, which is cheshach shalamata, the darkness below. Hainu b'chinas mitzias hadover, which means the actual substance of existence. Just a second. I'm not sure if he's referring to the garment or he's referring to earlier. Okay, so the garment is a form of concealment. From there evolves the erev darkness. And then this is followed by light, which is the light that radiates and illuminates through the garment to radiate the darkness. Okay. Let me explain, because it's going to get a little confusing here. First, he said, very simple. First, in order for there to be light that can be received, you first need to erev, tzimtzum, concealment, and then comes the light that radiates. But then he spelled it out a little more detailed. He said the light that radiates in the darkness, that follows the darkness, is not just following the tzimtzum, it's also following the light that went through a garment. The light itself is like a garment that conceals. That's also included in the Reisha Chashecha, in the initial darkness, the Salma, the garment of light. That's what he's saying here. So it's not just the tzimtzum, it's also the garment of light, which from that will evolve darkness in general. So the garment of light and the garment of tzimtzum, they both evolve darkness. Okay, it's interesting. And then comes, once you put on the garment of light, in other words, that light is subject to concealment, Then comes a light that shines through the garment into the darkness.
Is he saying that in order for the light coming in from say Oblique coming in,
I would hold up any questions until we finish
Sorry?
the whole subject here.
I'm sorry?
I would hold off with any questions until we finish the whole subject. We're in the middle of discussing it, so we're going to be learning about this.
Okay, sorry. I was trying to understand just this very language here, not to jump ahead.
We're all trying to understand it, and as I said, my suggestion is we read on until we see the fuller picture, then we can really fully understand.
Okay.
As I just explained, what he's basically adding here is that the Reisha Chashecha, the darkness, is not just the tzimtzum, it's also the oyer that is like a concealing garment in order to bring the light to be able to shine through the garment. So there's the tzimtzum, and then there's the oyer that is serving like a garment. But what's the point? Think of the garment as being like a transparent garment that now allows the oyer to go and radiate into the darkness of the tzimtzum. Okay.
You're saying that this garment of light is after the tzimtzum?
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying what he said here. I can't come to anything conclusive because I haven't finished learning it. We're reading it. So, right now, I'm just reading what the pshat. I'm not processing. I'm just absorbing what the Rebbe Rashab said right now. Frankly, I'm not even trying to understand it. I'm trying to just read it, and then we'll see. I want to finish the subject. Then we'll see what's left clear, what's unclear. I have questions too, trust me. But I've been trained to first listen before processing. So I'm trying to first just see what he's saying, and then we'll figure out what he's going to say.
Okay, we're just asking him what you just said just now. Not asking anything
all I
else.
said
Okay.
is pshat what it says here. All I said is pshat what it says here. That he's talking about, he now added that there's, that cheshech is the tzimtzum. He said, tchila tzimtzum addition. And then came the light that radiated the darkness. Then he added that this is Eita Er Kasama, that the light also is a form of concealment. And then there's a light that follows, which is the light that reveals. So there's an element that conceals, an element that reveals in the light itself. That's what he just said. That's all I said. You see, derech hasalma, through the shirt, the garment, to radiate the darkness. So I would wait and see how he's going to explain this, and then I'd go back and try to process it better. Okay? You want to speculate what it means? You can do so, but I don't want to speculate without understanding the whole subject matter.
No, okay. No, just asking you shot on that one sentence. That's all. We're speculating. Okay.
I said it.
Thank you.
I just repeated
If
what
you
it says
repeated,
here.
we heard
All I'm
now. We
doing
heard.
is
Thank you.
translating what he says here.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Va'inyan hu, and the inyan in this is like we see in all the creations. Sheyesh behen shnei b'chinas. They have within them two levels. Hainu haguf shel hanivra is the body of the creation, of the creature, of the nivra. Va'er va'shefa eliki. And the light and the flow, the divine light and flow, shu b'chinas nishmosei, which is the level of its soul, hashefeil of tomid la'chiesei, that flows on it constantly in order to energize and vivify it. So everything in existence has a guf and a neshama, basically, is what he says. The guf.
What does shefa mean in this case? What is the word shefa?
I said flow. Oyer and shefa. Light and flow is what I
No,
would
it's
say.
usually we use as a limited, as not a, as a limited flow compared to R. That's all I wanted to know.
I never saw that Shefa is limited. Shefa means that it's separate, but okay. Shefa means hashpah, transmission. If you want the actual translation, light, energy, and transmission, if you wish. Okay, the inner Shefa el-Liki, he's referring to all levels of transmission. He's not going into distinguishing. He's saying inner Shefa because he wants to encompass all forms of divine transmission. Okay. Which is the soul, Hashefeya Alof Tamid, that's constantly flowing above it to energize it. So it's like electricity and an appliance. Shubchinis Keli ve'er. This is the two levels of Keli and Er. Everything has a container and has an Er that's inside that container. V'chein gamken b'nevroim elyenim. And same is true with the higher creations, like it says, the spirit of Chaya, of life force, in the Efanim. The Efanim are angels that are called Efanim. Efanim are like wheels. They're angels like that turn, that spin. Sheyesh gufa Efanim. There's the body of the Efanim, there's their body. You say Ruach HaChaya be'efanim, v'Ruach HaChaya shebe'efanim. And there's the spirit of life, the living spirit within the efanim. Shukayach ha'peil ba'anifel. The power of the craftsman in the craft. The power of the producer in the product. U'kamoy she'aneshama mislabeshes b'guf. And like a neshama, a soul, that manifests and gets enclosed inside of a body. So basically, the Rebbe Rashab is essentially saying that everything in all creations have two levels, soul and body. The same is true in the mineral and the plant world. Yesh b'em nefesh, besides being a physical mineral and physical plant, they also have a nefesh. And it's called v'nikra nefesh ha-tzemeches. In Semeich, it's called the spirit, the plant spirit, or the vegetation spirit. And he says chulu, but there's also says nefesh ha-deimemes, the life force or the spirit within daimim, within mineral. Like it's written in Eitz Chaim from the Arizal at the end, where he discusses it very explicitly. That there's nefesh ha-deimemes, nefesh ha-tzemeches, nefesh chaya, v'nefesh ha'odam. So everything has its own particular type of spirit and soul that's giving it energy. The Alter Rebbe also refers to it in the beginning of Shayach V'Amunah, the end of bottom of page 1. Okay, where we're going with this, we'll find out shortly. V'hine, and now, haguf u'muhus hanivra hu b'chinas cheshech legabe haneshama. The body and the very personality of the nivra, of the creation, of the creature we're talking about, is a level of darkness compared to the soul within it. Compared to the soul, the body is like a dark state. The flame of God, a flame, it's light, is the soul of a human being. So a neshama is compared to Ur, and a guf is compared to Keli, Cheshach. Just like there's an infinite distance, or they're not, there's a proportionate, they're disproportionate darkness compared to light. Shem Beis Hofchim, they're two opposites, light and darkness. In other words, it's not like a neutral state. Light and darkness are opposites. Kach, the same as with Gashmis Anivra, the difference of physical creation. Same thing with the Guf Ruchni, the spiritual body of the Efanim, or the spiritual entities. So just like that, There's ein arech gashmi sivra. There's an infinite distance between the body of the Efanim of those angels compared to the living spirit that flows within it to energize it. That's a level, a divine level. So now he's added, so just like everything has two levels, body and soul, container and energy and light. So just like, so the keli, the guf, whether it's a ruchni or gashmi, is like darkness compared to light because they're opposites. So there's a big difference between the body of something and the neshama that's giving it life, which is divine. Now, next point. Next point is the body is not created by the soul. The keli is not created by the Ur. They're two different tracks. One enters into the other. One gives it life, but it doesn't create the very body of the object. The creation of the actual body is not from the energy and the vitality of the soul within it. Just like a light bulb is not created by electricity. Electricity energizes it. It brings it to life. It makes it shine, but it doesn't create it. The soul does not create the body. It gives it life. Kenoida. I'm sorry, Shaboy. Al derech hisav ziva shemesh ma shemesh. It's unlike the sun, the creation of the reflection of the sun from the sun. There, the sunlight does not come from anywhere else but the sun. It's not like there's two entities, a sun and sunlight, and then the sun just energizes the sunlight. That doesn't even make sense. There's a sun, and the sun emanates light, emits light, and that's sunlight. With soul and body, it's not like that. It's not like the soul extends and gives off energy and a body suddenly emerges. That's not the case. A soul can't create a body. Again, we have to be patient because where this is going, we're not sure yet, right? So just he's building a case of something, which is explaining it, and we'll bring it all back. And I can assure you that we'll get back to the lines that we all have questions about, what exactly means with the shirt and the garment. Now, here comes another parenthesis. So I'll read the parentheses, even though it's parenthetical. When it comes to the creations below, the creation of the body is not from the soul as it's known. However, you could say that's only down below. What about Ruchnius? How about by Efanim? Maybe you could say that the Keli of Atzilus is created by the Ur. This body is not created by the soul. But maybe the Kelim and Ruchnius, since they're Ruchnius, maybe they are. That's what he's going to qualify. But Lamaila, in the spiritual realms, the creation of an existence is coming from Ur. It says, and you energize them all. Al tikra machaya ela mahava. We don't just say you energize, but you create all. Al derechis the mahava she'er eliki mahava es anivra. The divine energy creates the creation. Umislabish b'teichi lachyese. And in addition, it also manifests within it to give life, unlike a body and a soul. Nevertheless, he says, even though that's the case, which I'm wondering why he says that's the case, we do know that the Kalim have a root from the Rishimu that's separate than the root of the Ur. I guess he's saying the following, that when it comes to a human being, the soul itself, no matter how powerful it is, will not create a body if you don't have a father and a mother who provide the seed and the egg. So the Gemara that says there are three partners yes, we need God for the neshama, but we need the mother and father in Teva. Of course, God can make any miracle. We're not talking about miraculous now. But you need the body to be created by the father and the mother, who give it the physical container. Then the Hashem, the third partner, provides the soul. The soul now gives it life and they come together and they grow together. But in Ruchnius, when you say, let's say, the Keli of Chachma or the Kelim of the Efanim, Gufa Efanim, since they're all spiritual, it's the Eir that's actually creating also the Keli. Even if the Keli has a root of its own, like we say in Pasuk Eliyahu, that if you remove the Eir, the Keli remains like this body without a soul. But in the technical sense of it, there is no Keli if there's no Eir. The Eir carries that power and makes the Keli a Keli. Whereas in the Gashmis, that's not the case. I think that's
didn't
what
we say?
One second.
Okay.
And nevertheless, hold on. Nevertheless, even that's the case that the Eir is Mahav Esakel, that the Eir creates the Keli, the Guf, Lamaila, Messias, but still not like light and the sunlight. Like I said, like we're going to learn, because the Keli has its own root. So the Eir is the one that brings it into being, but you can't still not like the Keli being like the sunlight coming from the sun. That's the key distinction he's making here, even though you can distinguish it from a physical body. Yeah, you want to ask something?
Don't we say that the Kalim come from Shimu?
Didn't I just discuss that for the last 5 minutes?
No, I thought you were saying that that Kalim come. You're saying that you're trying to understand how Kalim come from a different source than the same
That's
source
called
as the light.
I even mentioned Rishimu. I suggest listening again to this piece because I explained it. Shaharia Eir Vaziv hu me'ein hamoyer ubat legamri legaba hamoyer. Because when it comes to light and reflection, meaning of the sun, it's like in other words, light from the source. It's me'ein hamoyer. The light is similar to the source of light, ubat legamri legaba hamoyer, and it's completely nullified in contrast to the source of light. But the body is not at all similar to the soul. So sunlight, the light is exactly similar to its source. The body, even the body above, even in Ruchnius, where the Eir creates it, it's still, the Keli is not like the Eir. The Guf is not like the Neshama at all. Just like physicality is not similar to spirituality. Furthermore, who mastered al neshama? The body actually covers up and conceals on the soul. The exact opposite. Eir is completely bottled to its source. The Keli conceals the light. Or the Keli conceals the neshama. That's what he says. The body conceals the soul, which is the opposite of bittul. Opposite of being basically, not just it's not similar to, it's the opposite of. I think hepech bittul can mean two things. It's the opposite of bittul of the guf to the neshama, like opposite of the bittul of Eir to ma'ir, but also the neshama is a state of bittul and the guf is not. I think he means maybe both things. And the reason for this is the reason for this is because the Keli, the Guf, the root of its creation is not from revelation of a higher light. On the contrary, its root comes from a dark state, from darkness, which is a state of removing the light. It's only by removing the light that the cheshech gets created which is the state of Metzius that allows for the existence of something to emerge. So he's associating Cheshach with Metzius, the darkness that you're concealing the light in order for the Metzius to become a Metzius. V'hainu. I'm just looking ahead to see how far we should go here because this is not a topic that's ending so quickly. I don't like leaving this hanging as in the middle of nowhere, but it's not, as I said, it's not another line or two. It's like a whole section here. Let me read a few more lines and we'll stop. We'll see here. V'hainu. So when it comes to light, like sunlight, the sunlight is simply an extension of the sun. And as such, it's similar to it in every possible way. Similar to it, well, I don't know in every possible way, but it's similar. And it is, what did he say here? Ayin and bottle. Yeah, that's why he says bittul. Mashenk and the guf is not similar to the soul, just like physical is not similar to the spiritual, and also conceals, which is the opposite of bittul, the opposite of like the bittul of the oyer to the moyer. Okay. And the reason for that is, so in other words, if God created existence like light, only light, we wouldn't have an existence like ours because there would be no concept of independent consciousness. It's the key thing to remember. Because light, by definition, is an extension of its source and it reveals its source and is bottled, nullified, and it's completely sublimated to its source. The way creation happened, like he said, is that there are two tracks. The guf is not created by the soul. It has its own source. And as a matter of fact, its source, not only is it not similar to the soul, it's actually an opposite. And its source, therefore, its source is from a dark state, from a concealment, not from a revelation. Sunlight and light is a revelation. But creation, existence, the body of something, is not a revelation of the soul. Because it's rooted in the darkness, like he says, it's actually the oyer has to recede or be concealed for the existence to emerge. So existence and concealment go hand in hand. Whereas by light and its source, there's no word called concealment. There's no concealment. That's what he's saying here. So as such, Cheshach, that's why he says Cheshach comes first, because without that, there's not going to be any existing entity. He still hasn't explained what does it have to do with light, the salma, that the light also goes into a state of concealment, like he said in the previous page. But we'll get to it.
Can I ask, sorry,
This means shegam bisavuse mebchinas ha'er. That even though that also in its creation from Oyer, because remember, creation happens through Oyer. It's just that you must have a choshech for the Oyer to be able to create. Ima yeshe bizgalus haisavus. Even though on a revealed level, haisavus imina er, that even on a shebizgalus haisavus imina er, so in other words, it's the light, the energy of the light that's bringing the things into creation. Hine sheidish hisavusehu mebchinas hacheshach. The root of its creation is from the darkness. In other words, if light just shined, it would not create anything. It's only because the whatever's going to be created is rooted in the concealment. And then the light shines through the concealment. That's what causes something to come into being. The root of the creation is from the concealment and from the residue or the after effect, or what do we say, the trace, the impression that remained after the tzimtzum. That's the root of existence. However, to make that come into being, you need the energy of the oyer to bring it to life. So the hisavas begal is through oyer, but the sheirish is through choshech, through concealment. The hainu mebchinas siluk ha'er dafke through the removal or the concealment of the light. And that explains why it's not similar. Because if it just came from the light, it should be similar to the light, like the sunlight from the sun. But since his creation is coming from a deeper place, that's why al kain gam bisavusim min ha'er. So even when the air brings it to life, ein misave lias mein ha'er. It's not created in a way that's similar to the light. Kim nasa b'chinas nivdal memenu, but it's created in a way that's separate from it. B'chinas mitzias, in a state of substance, ub'chinas hester ala er v'achayis, and a state of concealment on the energy and on the vitality within it. It conceals that energy, like the body conceals the neshama. So how is that possible? If it would be created by oyer, it should be like oyer. But since it has properties, its essential ingredients are coming from darkness, from concealment, what we call the koyach hagvul, that's why it has its own independent reality, even though the oyer brought it to life. That's where we'll stop. Okay, you want to ask anything? Please, feel free.
I have a question, just to go back to this inyan of why the light itself is lavush, is concealed, the simlo. Is he saying here, because it's coming to ma'ir to light up something that is in Hester, that is completely different than itself, in order for the light to begin to enlighten the kalim, to fill it, it has to come in a way that's also a bit concealed. It's almost like if the light itself didn't come in somewhat concealed, it would be almost like the pre-tzimtzum, where there was too much light, it wouldn't define or wouldn't vivify the keli, because it would be overpowering for it. Is there anything about that here at all, or am I just misunderstanding entirely?
Maybe, maybe not. I answered the same answer I gave you before. We'll have to do what we're all going to do.
Cliffhanger.
We're going to learn the whole subject matter, and then we'll go back and try to figure it out. It could be that meaning. I'm not even trying to process as you are. I'm trying to learn what he says. The things I don't understand, I wait till he finishes, the Rebbe Rashab finishes, and then we go back and see what he meant. Right now, if you're going to, I don't want to speculate until I.
Can you, just for the sake of us who hate cliffhangers, can you give a little bit of Chassidus applied, like what any practical implications we can take from what he's just given over here? Or he's building such a foundation, there's nothing to derive yet.
You could always derive things. That's not the first question you asked. Now ask another question, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I'm asking you, did you chop anything practical that we can take out of this?
Let me explain something. When there's three stages here in learning something. The first thing is learning what the Rebbe Rashab says and understanding very clearly what he says. 95% of people who learn Chassidus or learn anything don't get that step right. They're jumping to try to understand it. They're trying to try to even apply it. So the first thing is critical to understand what he's saying. Because if you don't have that, you don't have anything. The second step is once he finishes the subject, you could understand the bigger picture and then go back to things that may not have been so clear. And the third is that every line of Chassidus you can apply to life. I could take one line here and I could apply it. I'm not going to apply the whole subject matter because he didn't finish it yet. But if you want to apply what we learned, but remember, it's another stage. When you're in the mode of applying it, you're not in the mode of learning pshat. The reason I'm stating it is because when you have to train your minds, this is called training. Most of our minds have never been trained to do the patient process of what I just said right now. When you plant a seed in the ground and a flower emerges, you can't pull the flower quicker than it's going to naturally grow, right? You can't say, hey, I have enough time and patience because I got to run. And I want the flower, you pull it out. You're going to have to water the flower and water the ground and and weed it, and the flower will emerge. So it's vital to train our minds. A lot of what my teaching here is not just to teach this mimer here and these maimarim. Maybe that's what many of you feel as I'm just explaining it because I know it, because I know how to explain Chassidus. To me, there's much deeper objective here, and that is to train you how to think. There's a training process. I learned it the hard way through the years I did Chazara, listening to the Rebbe, then having to write it down, making mistakes, going back again and again, learning sometimes something 100 times. So training the mind is critical here. That's why I am emphasizing this. With that said, as far as applying goes, now that we are stopping here at this page, middle of page 1193, I will say the following. You could apply a lot of things here. And I'm sure if you applied yourself to this, you all could all apply. The first thing is, I think this is a beautiful and very powerful, succinct way that you don't see very often in Chassidus, that the Rebbe Rashab himself is spelling out the two forces in our lives, the body and soul of everything, that everything in existence has this antithetical tension between a concealer and a revealer, between a soul, which is, like he says, is a divine part, and the keli, which is, or the guf, which conceals, is antithetical, that one is not creating the other. So in a way, it really explains the force, the two voices inside of us that tug in two different directions. There's the divine transcendent voice, like he says, Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, and then there's the voice of the body that is concealing and is not interested in the soul's presence, though it's quite in there. That to me alone is a plenty to work with, to show us how we tick and how we work. And the goal, of course, is to make sure they do speak to each other. And the guf should come to recognize the soul inside it. That's one thing. Another thing, the distinction between Oir and Keli, in the Oir and the Moir, and guf and neshama, I also find very relevant in the sense that they're things that by nature they're bottle. They're just bottle. They just are sublime and sublimated and in the presence of something else. And that we in existence are not that way. We were not created in a way to be bottle. Bittul comes with effort and work. Yes, it's a natural part of who we are, but it doesn't come naturally, which means we got to work on it because it's not the nature of existence to be bottle to its source. Oir, by nature, doesn't have to work on it. Sunlight does not have any avodah. It's always looking upward and it's always dependent on and reflective of and completely nullified to its source. We, on the other hand, are not that way. So it's a little refreshing to hear that we were created this way, the selfishness that we have. and this ability to be self-contained, self-absorbed entities the way we were made. Doesn't mean it's the way we should remain. We obviously need to work on now changing that. That's the whole purpose of all of this. But that's a few things that I derive from this, and I'm sure there's other stuff that can be applied in a very practical way. It's very also fascinating, which I'm sure this will already develop, of how the light and the darkness work together, and how the darkness affects the light and the light affects the darkness. How on one hand, the goof doesn't come from the light. On the other hand, the light is what brings it alive, just like a soul and a body. The body is not rooted in the soul, but as the soul, if take away the soul, God forbid, from a fetus, the fetus stops developing. So they need each other in that way. And also ultimately the difference in spiritual bodies and physical ones. That spiritual bodies, the body itself comes from the light, even though it's rooted elsewhere. And in physical, that's something I never saw before, actually. And the physical, even the body itself does not come from the soul. It only gives it energy. It's also an interesting thing to study. These are some thoughts.
Do you remember where the Rabbi Rashab actually talked about processing? I don't remember if it was volume 1, volume 2. I don't remember where it was, but I remember he actually.
I remember I said to everybody to mark it down because it was exactly what we were learning. And I said, now you know it's not coming from me. The Rebbe himself says you should do it, right? I do remember, actually. I remember it was at the right side of a page, but it was, I think, in volume 1, if I recall correctly, or maybe not. That I can't remember. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, he said it very clearly. No one marked it down at the time. I remember a few of you wrote down something.
Yeah, we wrote it down where it was. So we don't know where it was to see where we were.
Maybe you got to leaf through it a bit. I don't know. Okay. Anyway, unless there are other questions, we'll stop here at the middle of page 1193. Very fascinating. This type of suddenly the Rebbe Rashab changed course here. He went to very much like almost explaining Chassidus, very basic Chassidus here, which actually is very refreshing. And then, of course, he's going to bring it back to what we're learning. But this last piece, I find to be very, very, very unique. He explains things in usually this is what Chassidim used to explain a mimer. And the Rebbe Rashab himself is explaining it. As a matter of fact, my first chapter in Toward a Meaningful Life, Body and Soul, is almost word for word from here, but I didn't see it at the time.
Good stuff.
Okay, well,
I'll open the book this morning, Leonetta. Thank you, Rabbi.